Welcome back, and my guest this evening is the EFF, let me say it right this time, the Economic Freedom Fighters Deputy President Floyd Shivambu, who's with me. Now, an argument can be made, and it will be correct. Somebody would say, you know, the whole point of the political struggle that culminated with the democratic elections of 1994 was so that black people in particular should determine their own destiny and take charge of their own affairs.
Yes.
Now, 24 years down the line, the fact that the majority of people who live in poverty in this country, more than 50% of them, happen to be black, it's because of the government that they have elected that does not make it possible to escape poverty and enjoy a better quality of life as per the available resources that are there in the country. So why are we in this state, you think? And you're part of our leaders anyway. You are in parliament, Floyd.
No, we had said from the beginning, from 2013, 5 years ago, as the EFF, that the bigger problem that South Africa is facing is that we pursued political emancipation without economic emancipation. And Kwame Nkrumah says that such a struggle becomes meaningless when you just pursue political power without economic power, because you will just change faces of the political leaders. But in terms of the fundamentals of the economy, in terms of who controls and who benefits at the ultimate end, then nothing is going to change. The colonial society will reproduce itself even post-independence. And that is what we're dealing with. That is why we formed as the EFF. And we say that at the core of the problems of South Africa is the landlessness of the black majority and Africans in particular. That is why cardinal pillar number 1 in the EFF is expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution. That is what we stand for, because without the land, you won't be able to economically empower the black majority and Africans in particular, because as things stand, 80% of South Africa's land is owned by less than 5% of the population, whilst the 80% of the population, which is the Africans, are congested in less than 13% of the land. And that is the discourse that we have introduced to say that let us talk about land ownership. Before we speak about anything, let us talk about land ownership so that we are able to then deal with those. Because even if you want to think that you will better people's lives through housing, through building of universities, there is always a stumbling block of having to spend a lot of money buying the land from people who benefited out of it through colonial conquest and illegal means.
And what do you think went wrong then with the land redistribution restorative policies that we've had over the years? Because I read that up to around 60 billion rands was spent trying to acquire that land. The process has been slow. There are a lot of claims that have not been settled. But have we learned anything from that?
The statutory foundation of land redistribution was problematic. Section 25 of the Constitution was problematic because it said that no one might be deprived of property except when there's a law of general application, and that such expropriation should happen with compensation, and that there must be agreement with whoever is being dispossessed of that land on what is the price and whatever thing that has been put there. So the statutory foundation of land redistribution was problematic. But also to think that you will redistribute land piece by piece, that was problematic, because government, for instance, would spend 1 billion rands in Malamala, in Bushbuck Ridge, to buy the land from one white family. And then that white family continues to stay in that farm, continues to stay in that land. And then they pay the communities very little amounts as lease of that particular land. And that is why we're saying that let us have the common custodianship of all South Africa's land instead of focusing on piece by piece redistribution. Because in many instances, Bratim, you'll discover that the land that was taken through land reform piece by piece or land restitution piece by piece, majority of the times goes back to those that used to control it prior 1994. And that is what we seek to change with the discourse that we're introducing, to say, let us first amend Section 25 of the Constitution to permit for expropriation of land without compensation. And secondly, let us draft a land redistribution policy and act of Parliament, which is going to outline how and when do we give land through which mechanism?
Here's the point,
and
though.
that it must be reflective of demographics. Yes.
And EFF is very vocal when it comes to that.
Yes.
But the Zulu King, Zwelitin, has already responded to you, and he says, you don't touch the Ingonyama Trust whatsoever. And we know the Ingonyama Trust was brought into being through a law passed just before the elections of 1994. So what's your position? How are you going to manage that? Because the traditional leaders, on the other hand, say they still want to have some oversight of and custodianship of the land, just like the king. And then on the other side, you are saying the state, meaning the government, must have control of the land, which includes the land that's privately owned by individuals who have homes, residences on that land.
So the Ingonyama Trust Board, it's got one trustee, which is Iselo Samabandla, King Goodwill Zwelitin, right? It controls 2.8 million hectares of the former KwaZulu homeland. So the 2.8 million hectares is out of South Africa's 122 million hectares. So it's a very small portion of the land which the Ingonyama Trust Board administers now. So it actually gives the land through a lease system and charges people money for that particular purpose. Our proposal, our policy proposal is that let us have custodianship of the land in a manner in which will be at an overall level where the state is custodianship, but land must be given to the people for free on the basis of use it or lose it. That is our policy position.
Including the Ingonyama Trust.
We're saying that all the land should be under the custodianship of the state. But in terms of who administers the custodianship, it doesn't have to be municipalities in all the areas. We can actually listen to a submission that says that traditional leaders, not just Isilo Samabandla, traditional leaders in the entirety of South Africa should have a clearly defined relationship with the land which otherwise they were in custodianship and control of or administering in the past. That is what we said when we had a joint press conference with the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa, Contralesa, to say that if it becomes the EFF that completely abolishes the relationship of traditional leaders with the land, it means we are going to be responsible for the abolishment of the traditional leadership institution. And we do not want to do that because that is not part of our policies. We think that traditional leaders should still play a role in relation to land, but there must be certain contours that we define. And what are those? Non-sexism, no corruption, no nepotism. Don't give same piece of land to so many people and charging monies that are not consistent. That
and
is
of
what
course, the debate on the land issue is still on. I want to talk about economic growth now and the lack of opportunities with more than 30% of people not having access to jobs, the economy itself not growing, and it hasn't grown for quite a while now, and that is part of the problems and the almost immediate problem. What is the EFF's view of growing the economy rapidly, transforming it so that more people are empowered, the ownership patterns in it demonstrate that indeed this is a majority African country?
Do you know, the biggest problem with low economic growth in South Africa is the whole philosophical outlook and approach of the neoliberal ANC that believes that economic growth will come through foreign direct investment. And that has never happened anywhere. All countries that got to be economically developed, they focused on domestic investments and building their own industries. But the obsession of the ANC from GIA to ASGISA to the National Development Plan to now this new dawn craziness that is happening that we're going to get 1 trillion rands worth of investments from outside is that they think that somehow our solutions are going to come from some foreign magical investor who's going to come and put 1 trillion and then our problems will be finished. There will never be sustainable economic growth that is going to be driven by foreign direct investment in South Africa. What we need to do is to focus on key areas of consumable products and we produce them here in South Africa. As things stand, we import literally everything. Even in areas where we've got capacity to could manufacture furniture, to could produce food, to could manufacture plastic products because the byproducts of the production of oil through Sasol is plastic raw material. But we are so obsessed with importing capital, we're so obsessed with importing goods and services. which otherwise could be manufactured and produced here in South Africa. What do you gain out of that? You expand your revenue base, but you absorb a lot of people into permanent employment, because there's a market in South Africa who can demonstrate now that we consume a lot of goods and services that are produced outside.
Here's the challenge now.
Yes.
As a political party,
Yes.
the EFF,
Yes.
that if you want those policies and those approaches to be adopted and implemented, you need to become the government.
Yes.
And the ANC is pursuing its own policies because they argue we are in charge. That's why we do what we do. So is the EFF in a position to become a government? I mean, you won 6% the last time.
Yeah.
I don't know the extent to which you're growing now. What are you going to do differently to make sure that you become government?
Let's correct something quickly, that for our policies to be implemented, we do not need to be government. Our policies are being implemented in the hang municipalities here in South Africa. We are not government in Johannesburg, but the policies of the EFF are being implemented in Johannesburg. Our policies will be implemented in terms of insourcing, in Tshwane and all these other municipalities which are hung, without us being government, because we're not obsessed with being government. But one thing which I can assure you is that the EFF is going to be government of South Africa sooner than many people anticipate, and we're going to implement the policies of the economic freedom fighters. And by the way, it can even happen that even when we're not government in 2019, we can still implement the policies of the EFF. One, because they are based on superior logic, on basic understanding of what has to be rightfully done. When we got to Parliament, for instance, in 2014, the ANC was so dismissive and contemptuous over the land expropriation without compensation. But it came from the 54th National Conference now. They've adopted a policy position of the EFF. Same on the Reserve Bank, same on creation of a sovereign wealth fund. Those are policies that are within the founding manifesto of the EFF, which are now being elevated into mainstream policy positions that are going to be implemented later on. So our policies will be implemented whether we're in government or not, but one thing for sure is that the EFF is going to lead this country.
Floyd Shivambu, thank you very much for having been my guest.
No, thank you for having us.
Appreciate your time.
Sure.
So there you've had it from the Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Floyd Shivambu. He says whether they're in government or not, their policies are going to be implemented after all. What do you think? After the break, Professor Tim Noakes will be talking to us, and he's doing this following the end of his 5-year-long battle with the Health Professions Council of South Africa. We still want to hear from you on social media, and use hashtag the Tim Modise Network.